Never let a good crisis go to waste, stated Winston Churchill once. A crisis can also present us with an opportunity. How we react to it can change the course of history. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am delighted to address the 2022 Arctic Development Expo, albeit digitally, from Tromsø, Norway, to discuss Arctic collaboration and our pathways forward. As someone who was born and raised at the high north of Finland, and as someone who left the region at the age of 17 because I did not see enough opportunities there, I have dedicated most of my professional career working for Arctic issues. My first touch with Arctic issues professionally was in 2006, when I, as a young employee of the Finnish Ministry for Foreign Affairs, was set to analyze the recently published Norwegian Arctic White Paper. Ever since then, I have followed Arctic developments closely from a policy, business, and academic perspective. I was already there when the period which I often title Arctic El Dorado started. It's often said that it started with the Russians planting their flag on the North Pole in 2007. But it really kicked off in 2009, when the results of the US Geological Survey were published, stating that 13% of undiscovered oil and 30% of undiscovered natural gas can be found in the Arctic. That also coincided with the opening up of new sea lanes, resulting in an Arctic boom, where everyone who could creep and crawl wanted to get their share of what were thought of quick wins. After a while, reality kicked in. Operations in these demanding, harsh conditions are only for the most serious businesses. Those who are willing to go forward with science first, with the respect for indigenous and local communities and their knowledge. This is still the core of the international Arctic business community. Awareness of the increased economic potential of the Arctic also reached policymakers. Increased business interest in the region, combined with the wish to improve socio-economic conditions of living, resulted in the development of Arctic Economic Council during the Canadian Chairmanship of Arctic Council in 2014. Even if the Arctic Economic Council was established as an independent organization, this was the first time the voice of business community was brought closer to the work of Arctic Council. Throughout the years, we've seen that interest towards the Arctic has continued to increase, though not merely because of the economic potential of the region. We see increased impact of climate change. According to the Arctic Council AMAP working group, climate change takes place 3 times faster in the Arctic than in the rest of the globe. We have also been witnesses to what I often call indigenous rising, increased sense of pride and identity, the rise of truth and reconciliation processes and commissions, and also an increased acknowledgement and awareness of indigenous issues further down south. With the raising awareness of Arctic, people also became aware of the strategic location of the region. This resulted in discussions about military buildup in the Arctic, awareness, and of course, the role of near Arctic states. Increased attention comes, as always, with positives and negatives. On a positive note, there is an increased knowledge about us. But as Arctic is something that is considered of everyone's concern, I see that there is a clear danger that we are being sidetracked. The people of the Arctic will always need to have their hands on the steering wheel when we discuss the development of our region. Unfortunately, my experience is that sometimes we struggle to get our message across. The news coverage globally about the Arctic is still quite one-sided, heavily focused on climate crisis, the impact of climate change, the race for resources, and geopolitics. I have spent a large amount of my time these past years to bring in the nuances. Arctic is not just black and white. There are also grey tones. The newest turn in the global perception about the Arctic came as the pandemic hit us. When the pandemic was here, we saw the rise of economic recovery packages globally, most of them heavily focused on accelerating green transition, accelerating the work to reach our climate goals. And that could lead to the new rise of the Arctic, though for different reasons than first predicted. Not merely because of the region's economic potential, but because of the need for minerals, renewables, and the Arctic being the source of them both. This is also very well visible in the newest European Union Arctic policy paper from 2021. So, when 2022 started, I started the year off on a positive note, thinking this can be the year of the Arctic. Then came February 24 and the invasion of Ukraine. And on March 3rd, the 7 Arctic member states announced the pause of formal collaboration under the sphere of Arctic Council. Where do we go from here? The Arctic family has for a long time taken great pride in the concept of Arctic exceptionalism. Arctic exceptionalism means that despite the tensions elsewhere in the globe, despite war and geopolitics, the Arctic states and the Arctic regions are still able to collaborate. There is no doubt, Arctic exceptionalism is broken. But even if we pause the formal Arctic collaboration, can we afford to not collaborate? For me, the answer is simple. The answer is no. First and foremost, because of the people of the Arctic. 10% of Norwegian population lives in the Arctic. Even if we pause the formal Arctic collaboration, the challenges that we face, whether those are related to climate crisis or societal challenges, remain. The same goes for opportunities. Going forward, we need to have 2 conflicting goals at our heads at the same time and give them the same high level of priority. For me, many questions relevant to the future of the Arctic and our Arctic communities boil down to the future of economic development in the region. Simply put, this region that we all love is failing to attract and retain young people. The struggle against outmigration and masculinization of our communities is real across the pan-Arctic region. Economic and business development play an imperative part to prevent backsliding and social dislocation, which can give rise to a host of social problems. No thriving societies are built on government incentives alone. Lots of uneducated, unemployed young people are not good for society, any society. What is then the current state of Arctic economic and business development? The Arctic region is still characterized by heavy reliance on the extractive industries. We produce much of the same goods, which means that we do not do much trade with each other. We are dependent on having access to the global markets and to the global value chains. We benefit from the ties to outside the Arctic. As we all know, the largest regional economy in the Arctic, namely that of Russia, is currently heavily sanctioned. How that will play out is still too early to say. But I do see some interesting developments going forward. One of them is related to energy markets. This winter, Europe experienced an unforeseen energy crisis. We are in the midst of quite an aggressive transition to green. And at the same time, with the war in Ukraine, we face increased calls for energy independence. Will the current crisis increase the need for Arctic energy sources? I believe that the Arctic can serve the green transition through its renewable energy potential, minerals needed for battery development, and through its strategic location, whether that has to do with sea lanes or data. But the development of this potential is not straightforward. Going forward, we need to address pressing needs to balance economic development with environmental concerns. We all know that industrial activity will always have an impact. What we need to discuss is what is our level of acceptance for that impact. We see that there are new management tools that are emerging. One of them is finance. The European Union taxonomy will have a great impact on our way of doing business. We also witness the rise of ESG standards. ESG standing for environmental, social, and governance. Out of these, especially the S and the G are gaining ground. We need more positive, practical examples from communities, from businesses, and from Arctic stakeholders on what those S and G could look like in our region. I would like to take this opportunity to commend the Inuit Circumpolar Council for creating the protocols for ethical engagement in the Arctic. These are a great example of a proactive approach and a way of raising awareness. Going forward, I am convinced that we need to work together on all levels. On the levels of community, indigenous and local peoples, businesses and governance, to create Arctic-specific societal and governance standards. These should reflect the diversity of the Arctic region, because we all know that one size does not fit all, especially in a region as diverse as ours. Why is this relevant? Reading the ICC synthesis report, there was one quote that I found especially relevant. Before colonialism, Inuit were rich in natural resources. Now we are poor. End of quote. This very much reminds me of the discussion about Arctic resource paradox. Arctic resource paradox means that the economic potential in the region does not always translate into value creation locally. We are witnessing an increased acknowledgement that there is a strong need for local acceptance and a local license to operate when doing business in the Arctic. We need to see more of the benefits of business activities locally. This calls for value creation and new forms of employment at all levels. If we manage to make this happen, this can greatly help us in our fight against out-migration. Dear friends, any development in a region as challenging and as diverse as the Arctic requires collaboration. Arctic collaboration has been paused since early March. What is our restart strategy? 7 out of the 8 Arctic states recently announced that they will resume work on projects without any prior Russian involvement. Let there be no doubt, this is a positive signal. But until we see what the resumption of projects looks like, it is too early to speak of a true restart of the work of Arctic Council. What will international Arctic cooperation look like? Regional collaboration in the north will continue, though without Russia. We will need to continue looking more east-west. We will see more of issue-specific governance arrangements. A good practical example of this is the management of fish stocks in the Barents Sea between Norway and Russia. And thanks to the interconnected nature of the scientific community, we will also see individual Russian participation in scientific collaboration. During these times, convening power will matter. The role of non-governmental and informal Arctic gatherings, such as the Arctic Development Expo or Arctic Frontiers, will continue to rise. Future Arctic collaboration will also see some new elements. Local and regional inclusion will be stronger as we move forward. We already have practical examples of this, such as the establishment of the Arctic Mayors Forum. And we will be seeing more of our future leaders. Going forward, there will be an even more serious engagement of the Arctic youth in discussions about the future of our region. Ladies and gentlemen, during the Arctic Frontiers 2022 in May, the Norwegian authorities confirmed that they will take over the chairmanship of Arctic Council in 2023. What the chairmanship will look like remains to be seen. But climate and environment, sustainable economic development and business development of the region will still be of high importance. Excellencies, dear friends, the Norwegian scientist and explorer Fridtjof Nansen once wrote, "I demolish the bridges behind me, then there is no way but forward." Forward. That is where we are heading. But instead of demolishing, we build bridges. Because only through building bridges, through continued cross-border collaboration, can we build a sustainable, equitable Arctic future. So let's build bridges. Let's go forward. Because there is no pause button. With these words, I want to thank the organizers of the 2022 Arctic Development Expo for this opportunity to address you from Tromsø, Norway. I wish you every success with the coming discussions.